All right, good evening to everyone. Please turn your Bibles to 2 Samuel chapter 2. I'm going to move up just a little bit. I feel kind of lonely. 2 Samuel chapter 2 as we begin our study of God's Word. I don't have to remind y'all that that's one of the 4 parts of our spiritual growth process: to worship God, study His Word, love one another, and reach the lost. I talked on Sunday about the death of Saul and how David mourned his death and the death of Jonathan. And tonight we are going to be talking about the beginning of David's reign as king. So before we begin, I've asked Rory if he would please lead us in a word of prayer.
Father in heaven, we're so thankful that we're able to gather here this evening. We're thankful for your word, and we're thankful that we have this opportunity for study and fellowship, Father. We're so thankful for all the blessings that we have, and so thankful that you provided us with your word all that we need to guide us in our life here, Father. And we pray that as we study these lessons, that they'll be beneficial to us. Please be with Adam as he brings his lesson to us, and help him deliver it in a way that's most helpful to all of us, and that will help us all to grow spiritually and to be more as you would want us to be, Father. Be with us as we go into our study. These things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right. So as we begin here in 2 Samuel chapter 2, I'm going to read the first 4 verses. Then it came about afterwards, this is after Saul has died and David laments his death. Then it came about afterwards that David inquired of the Lord, saying, "Shall I go up to one of the cities of Judah?" And the Lord said to him, "Go up." So David said, "Where shall I go up?" And he said to him, "To Hebron." So David's been kind of without a steady place to stay, because he's been fleeing from Saul all this time, and then he's been with the Philistines. So now he's finally going to be able to be back in his land, and he's going to have a place to call home, and it's going to be this city of Hebron. And you see it's there south of Jerusalem. It's about 20 miles south of Jerusalem. Here's a couple of other facts about Hebron. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their wives, all except for Rachel, were all buried there in the cave of Machpelah, which is in Hebron. And it was also a city of refuge. I don't know if it still was in the time of David here, but it was in the days of Joshua and in the days of the judges. So verse 2 says, "So David went up there, and his 2 wives also," and see if we can kind of log away the names of his wives: Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal, the Carmelite. So we've already met them before, but it's good to read their names again. Verse 3, "And David brought up his men who were with him, each with his household, and they lived in the cities of Hebron. Then the men of Judah came and there anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying, It was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul." I'll kind of pick up with that part in just a moment. So David is king now, but he's not king over the whole land. It's going to take a little while for that to happen. So he's going to be king over the southern portion where the tribe of Judah was for a while. So word came to David, as we just read, that the men of Jabesh Gilead had done that kindness for Saul, and as well as Saul's sons. And what was it that they did exactly? That's right. They risked their own lives, and they went through enemy lines and went and took down the bodies of Saul and his 3 sons. He has another son that we're going to meet later that were killed in that battle from the wall of Bethshan. Took those bodies down, took them back to Jabesh Gilead, burned the bones, and buried them. And David is thanking them for that great honor that they did to Saul. And we talked about that. We talked about why they did that, why they even risked their lives, and that was because why? Yeah, because early in Saul's kingship, he had delivered Jabesh Gilead from Nahash, king of the Ammonites. and everything. So David remains in Hebron as king over Judah for how many years? Verse 11 tells us. 7.5, yeah, 7.5. Now that doesn't mean that's all the time he gets to be king, because he's going to reign as king over all Israel for more years, and we'll talk about that later. But 7.5, he's reigning over the southern kingdom of Judah. And I say the southern kingdom kind of in anticipation, thinking forward to the divided kingdom. But even now, there's kind of that division. There's Judah that has Jerusalem, and that's where David is reigning. And then there's the rest. There's all the other tribes, which are referred to kind of as Israel already this early, before we even get to the divided kingdom. Right? Okay. So Ishbosheth. We're going to talk a little bit about Actually, it's Ishbosheth. And probably not even pronouncing that correctly. But anyway, I like to say Ishbosheth. So meanwhile, Abner. Now we're going to meet a lot. We're going to come across a lot of names here. Some of these people you've met before. But it's going to be hard to keep them straight. So you got Abner. And who is Abner? All right. Now, Abner was the very capable commander of Saul's army. Remember how Saul went on to win a lot of battles and have a lot of victory, which was surprising to me because the Lord wasn't really with Saul. But I have to say that it's probably because he has this brilliant commander by the name of Abner, and he is the son of Ner. Well, in other places we learn that Ner was the brother of Kish, who was the father of Saul, which would make Abner and Saul first cousins. So they were related. So he really is dedicated, committed to Saul, because he's related. There's some other passages that make it a little confusing, because apparently there was also a Ner who was the grandfather of Saul. And anyway, don't get that confused. So Abner took Ishbosheth, who was a surviving son of Saul's, and made him king in Mahanaim. And this is where Mahanaim is located in Gilead. So that's on the east side of the Jordan. And he claimed that Ishbosheth was king over all the territory on the east side of the Jordan, which was Gilead there, and all Israel. But one of the first things that should tell you that that's kind of an empty claim is his capital. I mean, where he was anointed king here, made king, wasn't in Saul's old capital. Where was Saul's old capital? It was in Gibeon, right? Or Gibeah. But here on the east side of the Jordan is where this son of Saul's is made king. And so this is kind of an empty claim. And he's not really going to be fully regarded as king, but he's going to reign for a couple of years. And so Abner led Ishbosheth's men to Gibeon to fight against David's men. And they met at the pool of Gibeon. Now here's a picture of that pool. Now it wasn't a swimming pool. As we think of a pool, it was a water system. And it had a diameter of 38 feet, and it was 35 feet deep. So this is a picture from kind of above. You see those steps going down, that stairway spiraling down. And that stairway continues as you come down to the bottom, and it goes down beneath and leads to a water chamber. So we're just kind of continuing through in that tunnel here in these pictures. And then we finally come down to this water chamber, this pool that's 44 feet below the floor of the pool and is connected to a spring by means of a feeding tunnel. You didn't really need to know all that, but I just kind of thought it was interesting. So that's why I told you. So that's the pool that we're reading about here. I never had known how to picture this before until this lesson, and I found these pictures and everything. I have a great collection of pictures that the shepherds had agreed to purchase that a scholar named Todd Bolin has just taken all these, just thousands of pictures in Palestine and everything, and so I can find pictures of just about anything. So, back here at ground level now. So you've got two armies. You've got one on one side of this pool and one on the other side. And they were going to try to negotiate at first in order to avoid a war. This is kind of interesting to me, kind of ironic. You've got this man, Abner, who's come out against Joab and his men, against David's army. And he brings up the idea, hey, wait a minute. Before we actually fight, in order to try to avoid a battle, let's have 12 of your men and 12 of my men, have a combat. Kind of like, when the Philistines came out and brought Goliath. It was kind of a way to just settle the dispute with a small battle. And so, 12 men from both sides came out, and they fought, but there was no decisive victory because what happened? They all killed each other. They all of them died. And Abner, I kind of think that maybe Abner came up with this idea because he saw, hey, ain't no way I'm going to be able to defeat these guys. So how about let's have this contest? And then now all of his men are dead. So what does he do? He hightails it out of there, doesn't he? And he literally is fleeing for his life. And it's at that point that one of David's soldiers starts to pursue Abner, who's running. Now, I'm going to try to keep all these names straight. All right? You see if you can keep them straight, too. So, who is the one that's actually going to try to pursue Abner? All right, his name is Asahel, and he chases after Abner. Now, Asahel is a brother of David's commander, Joab. And then there's another brother, too. And what's his name? It's Abishai, okay? And so I know I've used to pronounce those differently, but I'm trying to say them a little bit more correctly if possible. So you've got these three brothers, Joab, Asahel, and Abishai. And they were David's nephews. So they're family. And they're very loyal to David and all of that. And Abner, he's fleeing, and he's got this guy on his trail, Asahel. And Asahel is fast. Like it says in the text, he's as fast as a gazelle. And so he's catching up to him. And Abner's just running, and Abner doesn't want to kill him. And he tries saying, stop chasing me. And he doesn't. And so what does he end up doing? What does Abner end up doing?
Kills him with the back end of his spear.
Yeah, so he's running, and he's got his spear, and he thrusts the back end of his spear through Asahel. It comes out his back, and he dies there. Well, now Joab and the other brother, Abishai, they pursue Abner more fiercely. And they pursue him and pursue him. But in that evening, when evening came, Abner basically threw in the towel. And he basically surrendered to Joab. That doesn't mean that he was going to serve them. It just meant, hey, I'm backing off, and I concede that you basically have won this. And David had only lost 20 men. How many men did Abner lose in that battle? 360. All right, so it was really bad for Abner. Well, David's men then buried Asahel in Bethlehem, then marched back overnight back to Hebron. And Abner's men went back to Mahanaim, and David's men went back to Hebron. Yeah, so see where those are located on the map there. And then let's read chapter 3 and verse 1 of 2 Samuel. Chapter 3 verse 1 says, "Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David, and David grew steadily stronger, but the house of Saul grew weaker continually." So we've kind of got this conflict going on. So, we think of this united kingdom as just one kingdom. Well, it kind of wasn't that clean cut, right? It wasn't that black and white. You kind of had two kingdoms going on, even here in as we call it, the United Kingdom, between David and Ishbosheth. All right, we'll kind of move forward here, but does anybody have any questions or comments at this point? Okay, so in chapter 3, I want to read verses 6 through 11. 2 Samuel 3, beginning of verse 6. It came about, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner was making himself strong in the house of Saul. Now Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why have you gone into my father's concubine?" Okay, so he suspected that he had slept with his father's concubine, with Saul's concubine, which would have been a great dishonor to Saul. Then Abner was very angry over the words of Ishbosheth and said, "Am I a dog's head that belongs to Judah? Today I show kindness to the house of Saul your father, to his brothers and to his friends, and have not delivered you into the hands of David. And yet today you charge me with a guilt concerning the woman? May God do so to Abner, and more also, if, as the Lord has sworn to David, I do not accomplish this for him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and to establish the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan to even to Beersheba." And he could no longer answer Abner a word because he was afraid of him. I don't know whether Abner really committed what he was charged with. I don't know whether he actually slept with Saul's concubine or not. But he certainly didn't like being charged with it. And if nothing else, he kind of uses this as an excuse to turn away from Ishbosheth and change sides and go to David's side. He was on the losing side, and he knew it. And he knew what God had decreed and what God had planned. And he had been resisting that all this time. So Abner sent messengers to David telling him, "Hey, I want to come and be on your side." Now this guy has been David's enemy for years. He had been involved in Saul's hunting down of David, trying to kill him and everything. And now you got this guy coming and begging, "Please let me come and be on your side. I'll help you." Well, if we were just talking about justice, what should David have done or said? "No way, Jose." And by the way, I'm going to come and get you. But that's not what David does. He agrees. Now he has a condition we're going to talk about, but David's grace and his mercy in this instance is really amazing. He gives Abner what he does not deserve, right? And we see him exercise earlier. He had that same attitude toward whom? Yeah, to Saul, exactly. Why do you think he's showing mercy towards Abner? Say it again.
Loyal to Saul.
Yes.
I think David respected that.
Yes. He was loyal to Saul. He was the one that protected Saul. Now, do you remember that time that David stole Saul's spear and his jug? And who was it that David reprimanded for not protecting Saul even better? It was Abner. So David was completely in support of this man protecting Saul, even though Saul was trying to hunt down David, because Saul was the Lord's anointed. And plus, Abner and Saul were related, and he was part of the family of Saul. So just out of respect for Saul, if nothing else, David shows great grace to this man. And so he said, "Okay, you can come and be on my side, but there's one condition." And what was that one condition? "Bring me my wife, Michal." And we've already read about his other two wives. Well, Michal, he was married to years before, right? When kind of early on when Saul was trying to hunt him down. And do you remember what Michal had done in protecting David? she helped him escape. Remember, put that idol in his bed and the goat hair and all that. And David escaped, and he left. Well, he didn't leave because he didn't love her. Why did he leave? Her maniac father was trying to kill him, right? But Saul gave her to another man. And what was his name? All right, Paltiel. And so she marries that man. And I imagine that probably through the course of those years that followed, Saul probably poisoned her mind against David. Wouldn't you imagine? And later we're going to see Michal's attitude toward David is a bitter attitude. And so, she leaves this Paltiel. She is taken away from him because David orders Ishbosheth to do that. He can now tell Ishbosheth kind of what to do. And he had to do it because Abner is no longer on Ishbosheth's side. So Abner goes and brings Michal away from her husband, who's just crying his eyes out at losing this woman. But she doesn't belong to him. Who does she belong to? She belongs to David. It's exactly right. But apparently, I get the idea she's probably not happy about this. Well, Abner's move to join David was accepted by the elders of Israel and by the men of Benjamin, Saul's tribe. And David holds a feast in his honor in Hebron. And Abner's new goal now is to do what? He wants to gather all the men, to all the tribes, all of Israel, to David. And I get the sense that he would have put his mind toward that. But is that actually going to end up happening under Abner's control? No, it's not. Because he's not going to be alive for that. So we'll talk about that as we kind of move forward. I know that this material at this point hasn't given us a lot of cause for conversation and discussion applications, but does anybody have anything you want to mention? I'll pause here if you do. Okay. So, as we move on here, I want to read, well, before I read that, let me mention this. So, meanwhile, Joab, David's commander, and his men had come back from a raid. And they came back just after Abner had just, been received, and that feast was held in his honor, and he and his men left. And Joab finds out about this, and he is indignant. Now, let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about Joab's character. Joab is a man that has a temper, and he is a man that doesn't always follow David's command. Okay? And we're going to see that. We're going to see that he's a vengeful man, and there's a lot of bad qualities about this Joab. So I want to read chapter 3 beginning in verse 24. Then Joab came to the king and said, "What have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why then have you sent him away, and he's already gone? You know Abner, the son of Ner, that he came to deceive you, and to learn of your going out and coming in, and to find out all that you are doing." Now, I don't know about you, but that rubs me the wrong way, that someone would talk to the king that way. I mean, he's upset, but you're talking to the king. Talk to the king with respect, with honor. Just like we expect our children to talk to us with respect and with honor, even if they have a disagreement. But he's just kind of rebuking the king here. When Joab came out from David, verse 26, he sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the well of Sirah. But David did not know it. You see, so he's doing this behind David's back. So when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the middle of the gate to speak with him privately. Now let's just pause here for a second. We read later on, we're going to read in 2 Samuel that there were 2 gates in Hebron, and there was a roof over. And so there would have been this kind of a part in between the two gates. And so the middle of the gate doesn't mean where all the people come through, like we say, like the middle of the road. That would have been the most public place possible. This whole conversation is going on privately, and it's kind of like, oh, hi, hey, Abner, I'm so glad that you've come. And, you know, the feeling is like he's welcoming him, and I'm sure that's kind of what Abner is expecting. He's being received here, and let me talk to you for a minute. And I'm reading between the lines a little bit there, but that's the sense that I get here. And so we continue there in the middle of verse 27. It says, and there he struck him in the belly, so that he died on account of the blood of Asahel, his brother. So Asahel was killed, being struck in the stomach, and and now Joab kills Abner by striking him in the stomach and killing him on the spot. What was his motive? Why did he kill Abner? Was it because he didn't think that he would do a good job for David?
Revenge.
It was vengeance. It was pure vengeance. It's ironic that we were talking about David's grace. And here's Joab, who's showing no grace at all. Romans 12:19. I've been talking some about Romans 12 lately in a couple of occasions when I'm up in front of you. Romans 12:19 says, never take your own vengeance or revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. And so he's taking vengeance into his own hands, which is not what we're allowed to do. So David was horrified, of course, when he learned what Joab had done, and he vowed that Joab's family would bear the blame forever. And he actually held a funeral for Abner, and he made all the people, Joab and his men included, mourn and dress in sackcloth and things like that. And he lifted up his voice in a lament over him. And then Abner was buried in Hebron. And all the people in the land, they saw how David acted here. And what was their feeling about how David handled himself in this? They liked it. Now, why do you think the people liked the fact that David, had this loving attitude toward his enemy, Abner? Yeah.
That's just one family. It is one family with a bunch of descendants. That's all it is. And if there could be a reconciliation, it could take place early in David's ministry.
Yeah, good point.
Kingship.
So all the Israelites, they're all a family.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Did you say something, Miss Bonnie?
I said pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I also think about the fact that, Jason, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it would be quite fitting in the time for him, as the king, to say, oh, we're friends, and then send somebody to kill him, on the sly. And it says in here that people realized that David was real. He really wasn't saying that he didn't really want him dead. He was really trying to do this the right way. And then Joab, they'd taken that blood feud too far, and he wasn't a part of that.
Right.
But on the same token, I also find it interesting that he doesn't take vengeance. He doesn't do anything to Joab.
Right.
He doesn't do anything to him, and we see that as kind of a pattern throughout and I'm sure it has something to do with the people at the time. I don't know, but it just seems odd to us, or at least to me, that somebody does something like that and you don't turn around and say, hey, you violated the law.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So, but you've got the nation, and they just love what David's doing here. He's showing mercy to his enemy. Besides, most of the nation had served under Saul, and this man Abner was their victor, right? He went leading these battles, and so there was respect for this man in the nation, and so for David to show him respect was something that drew people to David, and the whole nation they just loved David. Jay?
Okay, so I know you mentioned Romans 12, but under the old law, wasn't it acceptable for you to do that?
Well, in certain cases, of course, God wanted you to take vengeance. God warranted David as the king and as a soldier and all of that and all of his past to take vengeance on the Lord's enemies, right? But this is a case where, here's a man that he wasn't killed with any degree of honor. It wasn't like he was out doing battle and he was killed. He was killed by, deceit and trickery, and it was just a low blow, and it was very cold in that way. So I think that's another aspect of it. But the fact that David shows respect to the Lord's anointed and those connected with the Lord's anointed, I think that was God's will. Because there was a time where David said, basically, look, I can't raise my hand against the Lord's anointed. And he has that same attitude with others that were connected with Saul. And that was in keeping with the Lord's will. He doesn't have that attitude toward everybody in general, right? But we do see this theme repeated often in the Psalms of, Lord, you take vengeance. You take vengeance. It's not to me to take the vengeance. You take the vengeance. And we see that a lot. And we certainly see that in the New Testament. Good question, though. Good question. And David did call on the Lord here to repay the evildoer for his deed. That's what he basically prays. All right. Good. Any other questions or comments? I'm glad we're getting some discussion.
I just think it's kind of funny because David hid with, oh goodness, Achish. He went and acted like he was going to be on his side, but he was really fighting
Right.
the other enemies. And so Abner was accused of doing the same thing by Joab. He accused Abner didn't know that, but Joab accused Abner of being there to spy on David and to do those things, which is the same thing that Achish I might be saying the wrong king, sorry.
Right.
Said about David when David was with the Philistines.
Uh-huh.
And David didn't take Abner as being that. He didn't take him as being a spy. Or He took him as a loyal subject to a king.
Mm-hmm. And we don't know what he would have been if he would have been allowed to live, if he would have been loyal or if he wouldn't have been. That would have been for his best interests. Just like David was loyal to Achish, right? It would have been in his best interest, but I don't know if his heart was really there. So there may be a little blindness on David's part, and sometimes grace is a little blind. I mean, if you err by showing somebody a little too much grace, isn't that a good error to make? I mean, it's better than showing somebody the opposite and coming down too hard on somebody. So I'd rather err on the side of too much grace. Good point. Boy, y'all, this is kind of getting deep. I'm enjoying this. All right. Any other thoughts or comments?
Adam?
Yep, Miss Jack. Mr. Jack, not Miss Jack.
Joab was not the avenger. If the person had been killed in some way. This was in battle. I'm sure that Abishai, whatever his name is, was armed, and Joab just killed him.
Right.
Gave him opportunity after opportunity.
Yeah, and that's another aspect of this. He didn't want to kill him.
Right.
Right. So it was kind of Asahel's fault for continuing to stubbornly pursue him, and kind of got himself killed in a way. So Joab is just showing a lot of foolishness here. And it is amazing, Jason, that David doesn't come down hard on Joab, but he just says, may the Lord deal with the wrongdoer.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am?
In verse 29, though, he calls down a curse on the whole family of Joab.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes, he did. Yes, that's a really good point. Verse 29, he said, may it fall on the head of Joab and on all his father's house, and may there not fail from the house of Joab one who has a discharge, or who is a leper, or who takes hold of a distaff, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. Yeah. But again, he's putting that in the Lord's hand to cause that. Yeah. Good point. That's a really good point. Okay. So moving forward here into chapter 4, so when Ishbosheth heard about Abner's death, I mean, Abner was the one who appointed him as king. The way it reads, it was almost kind of Abner's idea. And so now Abner's dead, and Ishbosheth and his men, they just lose all courage. And so he had these two men who had led raids and who were kind of some leading men under him. And here we go with some new names. It was Baanah and Rechab, if we're going to try to pronounce those a little bit accurately. And one day, they decided that they wanted to get in David's favor by killing Ishbosheth. Well, they just didn't know David, did they? They snuck into his house in the middle of the day, and what was Ishbosheth doing? He was taking a nap. Any of y'all like to take naps in the middle of the day? It's the heat of the day. He's taking his daily nap, and they come in there as if they were coming to get grain, because there's servants and everything, and we're just here again. And they go in there, and what do? They kill him. Yeah, sure. And then they cut off his head, and so he's murdered in his sleep. Again, not in battle. There's no honor in what they do at all. And then they take his head, and they're just super excited. They travel all night, and they come to David, and look what we did. And then I want to read there in chapter 4, beginning in verse 9. David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother, sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and said to them, as the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all distress, when one told me, saying, behold, Saul is dead, and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and killed him in Ziklag, which was the reward I gave him for his news. Remember, we talked about that last class. How much more when wicked men have killed a righteous man in his own house on his bed? Shall I not now require his blood from your hand and destroy you from the earth? Then David commanded the young men, and they killed them and cut off their hands and feet and hung them up beside the pool in Hebron. And I'll put up that picture one more time. Probably, one of the trees, not these trees, because it was so long ago, but probably hung their bodies on one of the trees surrounding the pool. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the grave of Abner in Hebron. One point of application is I think that many religious, I know because Jesus tells us in Matthew 25, many religious people are going to have this similar kind of experience on the day of judgment. They're going to come before God thinking, I've just done great. I mean, I've striven and I've worked so hard in religion and serving you, only to find out they were following a false gospel, or to find out they were serving the Lord in truth but not in spirit, or whatever it might be. They were pursuing salvation, as it were, by works, and they're just going to face total surprise in that day. That's a very sad reality, because here are these men. They think David's going to be so happy. And then David says, no, I'm going to kill you. And that was a total surprise for them. So I guess a lesson for us is make sure that we don't have that kind of shock and surprise on the day of judgment. Make sure that we are, as Jesus said in John 4, worshiping the Lord in spirit and in truth. Yes, ma'am, Debbie.
Why do you think David didn't kill Joab for what he did to Abner?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some of it might be because Joab was so valuable to David in battle, and he was a great warrior and a great commander. He was high up in David's army. He'd been with him for years, and so it might have been that he is he's extending a level of grace in not striking Joab on his own.
So the other two that he had killed didn't mean as much to him?
Exactly. Yeah. They were the Lord's enemies. And so David sees things in very black and white terms, in terms of who's on the Lord's side and who's not. Jason?
Was Joab one of the ones that David told Solomon to kill? Was that him?
I
remember
I would have to double check that. I would have to double check that.
It seems like there was a reason he had never put him to death, and I don't remember if he explains it to Solomon or just...
That's a good question. I'm going to have to look at that. We're out of time. So, good question. I'll look at that, try to get that answer to y'all Sunday. Okay, so please read through the beginning of page 59 of your book. And thanks, everybody, for all your very good questions and comments.